The attorney's office smelled like old paper and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. I remember thinking that was an odd detail to notice, given everything. My brother sat across the conference table from me, already leaning back in his chair like he owned the room. He'd flown in from Seattle the night before. First time I'd seen him in almost 3 years. Mom had been gone for 11 days. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours in a row since the hospital called. I was still running on funeral adrenaline and casseroles from the neighbors, and I had a stack of sympathy cards on my kitchen counter that I hadn't been able to open yet. My brother, I'll call him by what he was to me in that room, which was a stranger wearing my brother's face, had sent flowers to the service. Nice ones. The kind you order online in about 4 minutes. He did not help plan the service. He did not call the funeral home. He was not there when Mom stopped recognizing me, or when she started calling out for people who'd been dead for 20 years, or when I had to learn, at 31 years old, how to give a sponge bath to the woman who raised me. He was not there for any of it. But he was there that Tuesday morning, in a pressed button-down shirt, ready to collect. I should back up. Mom was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's when she was 62. I was 26. My brother, 4 years older than me, living his tech sector life in the Pacific Northwest, got the same phone call I did. We both sat with that news for a few days, and then life, as it does, kept moving. The difference was where it moved us. I was already in Raleigh, 20 minutes from Mom's house. I had a job I liked well enough. Medical billing. Not glamorous, but steady, and an apartment with a lease I could break if I needed to. I didn't have a reason to be anywhere else, so I stayed close. I started checking in more, weeknight dinners, Saturday errands, doctor's appointments when she got nervous about going alone, which was most of them. My brother had a mortgage, a wife, a son in 2nd grade, and reasons. There were always reasons. The flight was expensive. He couldn't take the time off. His wife had her own family stuff. The kid had a thing at school. I understood each one individually. Collectively, they added up to, I am not coming, so I became the person who came. For the first 2 years, it was manageable. Mom was still mostly herself, sharper than people gave her credit for, still doing the crossword every morning, still making her famous lemon pound cake for every neighbor birthday on the street. The tremors were there but mild. We laughed about things. We watched a lot of old movies. I was not a caregiver yet, not really. I was just a daughter who lived nearby. Then year 3 happened, and year 4, and the distinction between daughter and caregiver started to dissolve. By the time Mom was 67, she needed help with things she would never have asked for if she'd had any other option. She was proud in the particular way of women who had always handled everything themselves. Asking for help hurt her. I tried to make it feel like it wasn't help, like I was just there, like it was nothing. I got good at that. I hired a part-time aide for the weekday mornings so I could keep working full-time. Her name was Rosario, and she was worth every penny, which was $22 an hour, 4 days a week, which I paid for myself because Mom's fixed income barely covered her mortgage and utilities and medications. The medications alone were over $400 a month out of pocket, after insurance. I know that number exactly because I reviewed it every single month for 4 years. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because it matters later. My brother visited twice in 5 years, both times for long weekends. Both times I made sure the house was clean and there was food in the refrigerator and Mom was having a good stretch because I didn't want his memory of her to be hard. I was still protecting everyone from everything. I did not tell him how bad the nights got sometimes. I did not tell him about the falls, all the medication adjustments that made her confused for weeks at a time, or the afternoon I found her sitting in the backyard in January in her housecoat because she'd wanted to check the garden and forgotten it was winter. I handled those things and I filed them away and I kept going. He called on her birthday and at Christmas. She always told him everything was fine because she didn't want to worry him. He believed her or he chose to. I was never sure which. What I did know was that for 4 years I'd been writing it all down, not because I planned to use it. I started the notebook because I was overwhelmed and keeping records helped me feel less overwhelmed. It started as a caregiving log. medication times, doctor's notes, questions to ask at the next appointment. Then it became something more. I wrote down the dates I drove her to appointments, the checks I wrote, the calls from the ER at 2 a.m., the names of the specialists, the hours, all of it, in my handwriting, in a green spiral notebook that lived in the kitchen drawer next to the takeout menus. I've filled 3 of them over 5 years. I wasn't building a case. I was just living my life and writing it down because that was how I survived it. Mom died on a Thursday in March, which felt wrong because she'd always loved Thursdays. She said Thursdays had potential. Nothing had gone wrong yet, but the weekend was close. She passed in her own bedroom in her own bed, which is what she'd wanted. I was there. My brother was not, though I had called him 2 days earlier and told him that if he was going to come, now was the time. He said he'd look at flights. I don't know if he ever did. I planned the funeral in 4 days while also answering condolence emails and figuring out what to do with her houseplants and calling the utility companies and doing all the invisible work that death generates. My brother arrived the evening before the service. He hugged me at the door and said, "You've been holding this whole thing together, haven't you?" And I said, "Yeah, because what else do you say?" He stayed for the service and 2 days after, he helped carry boxes to the garage. He was kind, genuinely in the way people can be kind when grief makes them briefly better versions of themselves. I thought maybe things had shifted. I thought maybe this loss would do something to him. Then he flew home, and 2 weeks later his attorney contacted Mom's attorney, and I understood that nothing had shifted at all. Mom had a will. She had made it 4 years earlier when the Parkinson's was progressing, and she was still clear-headed enough to be deliberate about things I knew existed. I did not know exactly what was in it because she had not told me, and I had not asked, because asking felt like circling, like waiting, when the attorney, Mr. Calloway, 60-something, patient in the way of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Read the will that Tuesday morning, I found out. Mom had left the house and the majority of her estate to me. A smaller portion to my brother. Not nothing, but not equal. My brother's attorney, who had apparently been retained sometime in the 2 weeks since the funeral, was arguing that the will was invalid. That Mom had not been of sound mind when she made it, that she had been unduly influenced. That word, influenced, landed in that conference room like something thrown. I looked at my brother across the table. He was looking at his hands. She was 67 when she made that will, I said. She was still doing the crossword every morning. His attorney spoke. I was not speaking to his attorney. You flew out twice in 5 years, I said. Twice. He looked up. I had a family. So did I. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just also had a mother who needed someone there. Mr. Calloway cleared his throat gently. He had the particular stillness of a man who knew exactly how this was going to go and was waiting for the room to catch up. My brother's attorney made his argument. I had come prepared to make mine. I reached into my bag and placed 3 green spiral notebooks on the conference table. I want to be clear about what those notebooks were and what they were not. They were not a trap I had set. They were not a weapon I had prepared. They were a record of my life for 5 years, which happened to contain documentation of exactly who had been present and who had not. Mr. Permanta. Calloway picked up the first one. He is a quiet man. He had been Mom's attorney for 15 years, and he had known me since I was a teenager who used to come to his office after school sometimes, because Mom would bring me along when she had adult things to handle. He did not say anything for a moment. He turned pages carefully, the way you handle something that belongs to someone else. Then he turned to my brother's attorney and said, in the mildest possible voice, "I think we should look at these." My brother's attorney leaned over and scanned a few pages. I watched his expression do a specific thing, a small recalibration, a realization that the room had changed shape. He said something to my brother quietly. My brother's jaw tightened. 5 years, Mr. Calloway said, almost to himself. He was reading a page from the second notebook. Every appointment, every expense. He glanced up at me briefly, not with pity. with something that felt more like acknowledgement. The notebooks contained dates and details that could not be invented after the fact. They contained receipts I had taped in. They contained notes from doctors written in my handwriting because I had been the one taking the notes. They contained the kinds of things you only know if you were there. The names of the nurses on the overnight floor, the specific way Mum liked her eggs after her appetite changed. The date she asked me to take down the photograph from the hallway because looking at it made her sad, and she didn't want to explain why. They contained a Thursday in November, 3 years before she died, when my brother had promised to come for Thanksgiving and called the day before to cancel. I had written it down without editorializing, just the facts. He called at 4:15, said he couldn't make it. Mom said, okay. She did not seem surprised. We had dinner, just the two of us. She said she liked it quiet. My brother's attorney sat back. He and my brother had a short, hushed conversation that I was not meant to hear, but partially did. The phrase, not a strong position, featured in it. My brother looked at me. He had the expression of someone who had expected a different room and found himself in this one instead. I just thought, he started. I know what you thought, I said. I was not angry in the hot way anymore. I had moved through that somewhere around year 3 of being the only one who showed up, and what was left was something colder and quieter and more certain. I had not been waiting for this moment. I had not wanted it. I had wanted a brother who showed up. I had wanted not to be sitting in this office at all. But here we were, and I was not going to apologize for having been present. She knew, I said. That's why she made the choices she made. Not because I influenced her, because she knew exactly what each of us had done. She was watching the whole time. She always was. He didn't say anything to that. Mr. Calloway set the notebooks down with the gentle finality of a man closing a book he has read to the end. He looked at my brother's attorney. I don't think we have grounds to contest, he said simply. The documentation here is extensive, and frankly, your client's absence from his mother's care is a matter of record. These notebooks, but also medical records, financial transactions. A challenge to this will is not going to go well. There was a pause that lasted about 15 seconds and felt much longer. My brother's attorney nodded once. A small, professional nod that meant, we're done here. My brother and I sat in the parking lot afterward. Not quite together, not quite apart. He had his keys in his hand. I had my bag on my shoulder. The afternoon was the specific pale grey of early spring in North Carolina, that in-between light that can't decide if it's winter anymore. He said, I didn't know it was that bad. I believed him, actually. That was the thing that had taken me years to understand. He wasn't a villain. He was just someone who had looked away and kept looking away until looking away became his normal, and he forgot there was anything else to see. The absence had been a series of small decisions, not one big one. It was easier not to come. And then it was easier not to come again. And then 5 years had passed. I wrote you, I said, a few times. Long emails. He was quiet for a moment. I know. You responded to one of them. He didn't argue with that. I thought about saying more. I had things I could have said, 4 years' worth, filed carefully in the same methodical way I had filed everything else. But I looked at him standing there in the pale grey light, and I thought about Mum saying she didn't seem surprised, and I thought, I am so tired of carrying things for people who are not carrying anything back. I have to get home, I said. I have a lot to deal with. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else and didn't, and I didn't wait to see if he changed his mind. The house became mine officially 6 weeks later. I walked through it alone the first evening, not to assess it, not to make plans, just to be in it. It smelled like her, still, faintly. The lemon verbena hand lotion she had used for as long as I could remember. The particular warmth of a house that had been lived in by someone who kept the thermostat comfortable and baked things on Sunday afternoons. I sat in her chair by the window for a while, the one she used to do the crossword in. There's a thing people say about caregiving, about how it's a gift, about how you'll be glad you did it. And I think that's true and also incomplete, because the doing of it is not always, maybe not even usually, graceful or light or gift-like. It is hard and it is exhausting, and it asks things from you that you did not know you had. And you give them anyway, not because you're a saint, not because you're earning something, because she was your mother, and she needed you, and you were there, and being there was its own kind of answer to a question you hadn't known was being asked. She knew what I had done. She wrote it into the only document that mattered. That was enough. That had to be enough. I turned off the lights and locked the front door and drove home through the pale spring evening, and for the first time in longer than I could easily remember, I did not feel like I was holding the weight of something that was about to fall. My brother and I don't speak often now. We're not estranged exactly. There's a civility at the edges, a Christmas text, an occasional check-in when something in the family news cycle requires it. But the closeness I had once hoped for, the recalibration I had briefly expected from grief, that didn't come. Maybe it will someday. I'm not holding my breath, and I'm not holding a grudge either. I'm just not holding space for something that isn't there. What I do have is a house with a garden that I'm slowly learning to take care of. Mum had a way with it that I never inherited, but I'm trying. I planted dahlias this spring because she loved them. Half of them came up crooked and one bed got waterlogged, and I don't entirely know what I'm doing, but I show up for it every morning. That's what I know how to do. I show up. I've thought a lot about what those notebooks actually were. Not as evidence, that's what they became, not what they were. They were just the record of a life I was living. Every appointment I drove Mom to, every check I wrote for Rosario, every 2 a.m. phone call from the hospital that I answered alone. I wrote it down because writing it down was the only way I could process it and keep going. I was not building toward anything. I was just trying to survive a hard season without losing my footing. And that, I think, is the thing nobody tells you about doing the right thing consistently over a long period of time. It doesn't feel noble while you're in it. It feels like Tuesday. It feels like another prescription to pick up, another specialist appointment, another dinner for two because nobody else came. You're not thinking about what you're owed. You're thinking about whether she took her 6 o'clock medication and whether the aide can cover Thursday. Derek was not a monster. That took me a while to be able to say without it feeling like an excuse I was making for him. But it's true. He was someone who chose comfort over and over, in small enough increments that maybe he never had to face what he was choosing. That's its own kind of trap. Because when you look away long enough, you lose the ability to see what you've missed. And then one day you walk into an attorney's office and 3 green notebooks are sitting on the table, and suddenly the entire shape of the last 5 years is visible at once, and you are not prepared for what it looks like. The attorneys didn't do that to him. I didn't do that to him. He did it to himself. One unanswered email at a time, one cancelled Thanksgiving at a time, one reasonable excuse at a time. That's what I mean when I say this story isn't really about the will. The will was just the moment when the accumulated weight of all those small choices became visible to everyone in the room. There's something I believe about integrity that I couldn't have articulated when I was 26 and just trying to get through the week. Is this: the choices you make when no one is watching are still choices. They accumulate, they compound, they become the record of who you actually are, not who you meant to be or who you think of yourself as being. I was not keeping those notebooks to prove anything, but they proved something anyway, because truth has a way of being true regardless of whether anyone is looking. Mom knew. She had been watching the whole time, with the particular quiet attention of someone who has loved 2 children differently and is trying to find a fair accounting. She made her decision with a clear mind, in a document witnessed by people who knew her. She was not confused. She was precise. And the precision of her decision is the thing I come back to most, not as vindication, but as evidence that she saw us clearly and loved us honestly and did not confuse the two. I show up for the garden now. Half the dahlias came up wrong this spring, and I don't entirely know what I'm doing, but I'm out there every morning trying. Some things you learn by doing them badly for a while before you figure out the right way, and some things you learn by just not stopping. That's the part that matters most, I think. Not being perfect at it, just not stopping.